All right, my friends, I hope you did amazing with that new exercise, which was to predict the purchase decision of a new customer in the test set. That was the first customer who is actually 30 years old and earns an estimated salary of $87,000. Right? If we have a look at our test set, the original test set before the scaling, this one, this is exactly the customer you had to input in your predict method in order to predict the purchased decision. All right. And now in this tutorial, we're going to check two things. That first, you got the right implementation of the predict method and mostly the right input inside the predict method. And secondly, we will also check if the prediction is correct. And in order to do this, well, we're going to have a look at y-test. The purchase decision of that first customer is exactly this one. Because y-test contains all the real results here, all the real purchase decision. And so we're going to see if indeed our model was able to make a correct prediction by predicting 0 for this first customer of age 30, an estimated salary 87K. All right, let's do this. Let's proceed to the solution. Here it is, predicting a new result. I will leave the training and there we go. So let's create a new code cell, and now what was the first step? Well, of course, the first step was to take our classifier, because of course, the predict method, as any other method, has to be called from the classifier object itself. So we take our classifier object, and then from this object, we're going to call this predict method. By the way, let me show you this again. You have other predict method, which are predict log probability, which will return the log, the logarithmic function of the probability that your prediction is 1, that the purchase decision is 1, and you also have the predict proba method, which returns, of course, directly the probability that the purchase decision is 1. All right, so depending on whether you want to have directly the final prediction 0 or 1, or the probability that the dependent variable is equal to 1, well, you have the choice between predict and predict proba. Okay, so here we're going to take predict because we directly want to get the prediction, whether or not that first customer of the test set purchased, yes or no, the SUV. So here we're going to add some parentheses. And now I'm really interested if you got this right. What did you put inside the predict method in order to predict the purchase decision of that customer who is 30 years old and earns an estimated salary of $87,000? All right, well, first of all, let's remind the essential. Any single observation inside the predict method has to be input in a double pair of square brackets. Why is that? That's because the predict method expects from its input a two-dimensional array. And how do we create a two-dimensional array with only one observation, meaning only one row? Because what we're about to input is a two-dimensional matrix of one row and two columns, where the row corresponds indeed to that single customer and the columns correspond in fact to the features, the age in the first column and the salary in the second column. So there you go. Now I've told you everything. What you have to input here inside this second pair of square brackets, which corresponds to the columns, well, you had to input the two values of these two features, the age and the salary. And therefore, since our first customer is 30 years old and earns an estimated salary of $87,000, well, the two features here that we had to input in these, therefore two columns here, is first 30 and then $87,000. All right, so that's the first thing you must absolutely do. That you must absolutely have the right reflex. Okay, input your single observation within a double pair of square brackets to give the expected format of the two-dimensional array to your predict method. All right, so that was the first thing, but then not enough. You had to do something else, which is, of course, to scale that single observation, right? Because 30 years old here and $87,000 as the estimated salary are in the original scale, before applying feature scaling standardization. And since our model was actually trained, as we can see on X-train and Y-train, which were just previously feature scaled, that's the result of feature scaling, well, as I told you, the predict method can only be applied to observations where the features have the exact same scale as the one that was used for the training. And therefore here we need to apply the transform method in order to give as well the predict method not only the right format here, but also the right scale. And that's why we have to transform this single observation input in the right format into that new scale. And so what we have to do here is take our SC object. Remember that was the name of the feature scaling object which we used to apply feature scaling on both the matrix of features of the training set XTrain and the matrix of features of the test set XTest. So SC, and then remember we call, there it is, just below, the transform method. The transform method which has to take as input this whole single prediction input in a 2D array. All right, and the second one, and perfect. That was, my friends, the solution. And congratulations really if you got this right, because you had to pay attention to two things. First, the right format of the 2D array here for your input, and then transforming that input, those features, to get the right scale for your predict method. Okay, perfect. So now we're actually ready to run this, but we'll actually get a better output, a nicer one, if we put all this into a print, print that output of the predict method. And now let's press play and remember, let's see if our class value manages to predict the right outcome, meaning the right purchase decision, which according to the test set which contains the real result is 0, meaning that first customer of age 30 and $87,000 estimated salary doesn't buy that new SUV. Okay, so let's press play and let's see if it is 0, and great, it is 0. So good job. Our model did amazing here on this single observation, single customer. Great, so now we're gonna move on to the next step, which will be to predict the test set results. So that I'm sure you know exactly how to do. Just make sure to figure out if you need to apply feature scaling or not, and you will get to the right solution. Also, I would like you to please display, the vector of predictions, the vector of predicted purchase decisions for the test set and the vector of the real purchase decisions of the same test set next to each other. And you don't have to figure out how to implement that again. Remember, I want you to be efficient, so I encourage you to take that little piece of code we made in many of the regression models to display this efficiently. And that's exactly what we'll do together in the next tutorial. So until then, enjoy machine learning.